Hello friends, this is David Sami with A Christian Journey. For today and next few weeks, we want to turn our attention to the subject of marriage. Why so many of our marriages don't last? Where are we going wrong? Today we have more books, more seminars, and more people talk about our marriages. But yet when we look at our marriages, most of us don't make it. And the ones that do, how many of us are happy in our marriages? You know, we commonly hear people say that 50% of marriages don't make it. So if 50% don't make it, the remaining 50%, how many of them are happy in their marriage? Maybe 25%. So if we were going to add it all up, 75% of us end up not being fulfilled in our marital relationship. But why is that? Why, in spite of, again, all the instructions and all the seminars and books and everything that is available about marriage, our marriages don't last? As a matter of fact, I looked at a couple of sites just to get a glimpse of what are some of the common causes that leads to divorce. One site I looked at, it was a study done by researchers at the University of Denver. It was a small study. It only had 52 people in it. But these 52 people were involved in a prevention and relationship enhancement program prior to their marriage. And doesn't say how many of them, but some of them ended up in divorce 14 years later. And in this study, they kind of talked to these people, the ones that ended up in divorce, and they wanted to see what were some of the common causes that they parted ways. Now, this was a secular study, and I don't know about the people that were in it, if they were people of faith or if they were secular people. But the top three reasons that these people got divorced, the number one was lack of commitment. 75% of them, they basically said that they realized it was a lack of commitment on their part. The second reason was infidelity or extramarital affairs. So 59% said it was due to one of the partners committing adultery, and it was basically the final straw that really just put everything over the top. And the third reason was too much conflict and arguing, that it came a point that the relationship was so contaminated that they were constantly arguing or fighting. So these were the top three: lack of commitment, adultery, and just too much conflict in the relationship. But then I also look at a site that did a study on Christian divorces. Unfortunately, we are not doing much better than the secular world, because our numbers are very similar to secular people. So we are basically getting the same number of divorces in Christian community as it is in a secular community. But what are some of the top reasons for Christians to get divorced? Here, I'm looking at one study. Again, you can find so many studies online, but according to this one, the top reason for Christian divorces is adultery and pornography. Number two, lack of communication. Number three, drugs or alcohol or addiction issues. And then it goes down the list, you know, sexual problems, financial problems. But it seems like the top three are adultery and pornography, lack of communication, and addiction issues, addiction and abuse issues. But, you know, it's interesting that when we think of it, you know, I've been married for about almost 33 years. And I asked my wife about a few months ago that from a scale of 1 to 10, what she gives our marriage. And she said she gives it a 9. And it was interesting because in my heart of heart, I give my marriage the same number. And it isn't a perfect marriage, but I truly can say that I truly love my wife, and I think she does love me, and we are happy together. We have a fulfilled life. It is not a life that is void of issues or common things of life, common annoyances or things that will come up. But we have learned how to live with each other, accept each other, and be faithful to each other. But here is the thing. I think most of us in Christian community, I see two extremes. One extreme is that we feel like the direction that the Bible points us to as far as marriage is concerned is no longer applicable to today's lifestyle. So it just seems like it's a little bit outdated, out-mode instruction for our day. So even in our churches, when we want to talk about marriage, it seems like we primarily get our instruction from secular places. And we primarily focus on how to resolve conflict, how to communicate better, and issues of intimacy. And basically that's it. We really don't go into the Bible and actually see what the Bible has to say. But then we get an extreme on the other side, where we go to the Bible, but the way we apply what the Bible says, it's so extreme that it causes problem. It causes problem in our relationship, not because the instructions are wrong, but because how we apply those instructions. And I have heard from couples on both ends. I have heard couples that have tried it in a way of secular instruction, that things didn't work out. And I have seen people who have gone to the extreme side of what they perceive that Bible commands, and things didn't work out either on both ends. But is there a healthy balance that we can look to the Bible and see what it says, but learn how to apply it properly so that our marriages begin to become the blessing that God intended them to be, begin to look a certain way that is God-centered. And here is what God says to us in Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 16. I'm reading now, where God says, "Stand by the roads and look, and ask for the ancient paths, where the good way is, and walk in it, and find rest for your souls." In other words, in a day where things are falling apart, things are not going the right way, we need to maybe take a step back and look at the ancient ways, ancient path. Look to the Bible and see what it has to say. And there we find the rest for our souls. And that's what we want to discover. We want to look at what the Bible points us to what type of marriage relationship, and how it can be applied in a proper way so that things may go well with us. And today, as a matter of fact, I wanted to mention 4 pillars for a Christian marriage, that our marriage as Christians needs to stand on these 4 pillars, that these should be the foundation for our marital life and how our marriage should look like in order for it to be a blessing. The first pillar is that our marriages and our homes should be a reflection of God's kingdom. And what I mean by that is that when we come together as husband and wife, the home that we want to establish is a home that would reflect God's values and God's ways. That there should be something different about our home than a secular home. That when somebody comes to our home, that even the feel and the presence in our home should be different. That our home is governed by God's values, God's ways. That the direction for our household is determined by God's revealed instruction. That marriage has a purpose beyond companionship, beyond being together. But one of it is that our marriage would be a sample, an example of what life can be like when we live under God's instruction and values. That our home is going to be different than other homes in our area, and it should reflect God's ways and what it means to live under God. The second pillar is God's ordained order within our marriages. Now, when we talk about God's ordained roles, we usually have a knee-jerk reaction because we usually think that it can become oppressive, or God tells the women to submit to their husbands, and why should it be that way? And we can think about hundreds of reasons that we would have a knee-jerk reaction when it comes to our roles. But we need to keep in mind that when God gives those assigned roles, it's because something has gone wrong within us. As a matter of fact, in chapter 3 of Genesis, when God talks to Eve and tells her that from here on out, your desire shall be for your husband, but he shall rule over you. In other words, Eve, something has gone wrong after the fall. And from here on out, there is going to come a contest of wills within the dynamic of husband and wife relationship. That you would want to control your husband. You would want to manipulate him to get him to do what you want to do, how you want him to be. And he would do the same. He would rule over you, not in a loving way or in a loving relationship, but in a harsh way. That there is coming in a sense, a control issue within the marriage. But what is our answer to that? We all can testify to the fact that when we get married or when we are in a relationship, there is that little contest of wills. We want our spouses to conform to us and how we see things. But how are we going to resolve this? See, one of the issues that will lead us is conflict, irreconcilable differences. But God has given us order and a role to play within the marriage to be able to bring us together so that we will not have these issues. But our problem is the way that we apply these orders, that we go to extreme, that a husband-wife relationship should not be an employee-boss relationship, but that there should be an invisible order, that we all know where our place is and how we function properly in those places, that our marriage can be a blessing. And as a matter of fact, we want to talk about that in our future, talk about marriage in our upcoming videos, because it is of utmost importance for us to realize. But the pillar number 3 is raising the next generation of godly kids. That one of the purposes for a Christian marriage is to produce godly offspring. As a matter of fact, in the book of Malachi, chapter 2:15, God actually says that He desires godly offspring. that one of his purposes for marriage is that we should be able to produce the next generation of godly kids. Now I know, sometimes even with our best of attempts and effort, our kids would have a mind of their own, a will of their own, that they might go and part ways from the things that we have tried to instill in them. But nevertheless, we need to consider that one of the tasks that are assigned to us is to raise the next generation of godly kids. That this is the third pillar of a Christian marriage, next generation. And pillar number 4 is a commitment to the end. Now, I know that sometimes, again, in spite of our best effort, life is not perfect, and things don't go the way we hoped, and we part ways or we end up in divorce. But nevertheless, as much as it depends on us, we need to have a commitment that when I do get married, this is for life. Because it would be easy. Today we are very focused on the way we feel. We feel like if at this point in time I don't feel loved or I'm not in love with my spouse, that is a justification to think that this isn't working for me. This has run its course, and now I don't think I feel the same way, so it's best to part ways. No, a marriage will go through up and down. A marriage, will there be times that we don't feel very loved by our spouse, or we may not even love our spouse that much in a way that we think of what love is. But these are not justifiable ground for divorce. We need to realize that these are part of the process, but we will come out of this, and that we need to look at our marriages with a level of commitment that we are here for life under normal circumstances. Again, I'm not talking about abuse, I'm not talking about physical, emotional abuse. I'm talking about normal circumstances, that we should look at ourselves, that we are here to the end, until death do us apart. Otherwise, it'd be easy to throw in the towel. It'd be easy to feel like, this was a mistake. I don't think we are right for each other. But a commitment to the end. 4 pillar, 4 foundation for a godly marriage. Number 1, that we're going to have a home that would reflect God's values, God's ways. Number 2, that we each have an assigned role. We want to see what our role is. What is my role? And be able to function in a healthy and proper way and grow in my role. And number 3, to give ourselves to raise up godly kids to the best of our ability with the Lord's help. And number 4, that we are in this to the end, a commitment to the end. So these are 4 pillars that we're going to build on marriages on. But for the following weeks, we want to now take some of these pillars and talk about them. And as a matter of fact, the first pillar would be what are our roles? We want to look as a husband, what is my role? What directions should I go? What are the things that God has assigned to me? And how can I become a better husband, become a godly husband? And then from there, we go on to wife's role and what God has assigned to her, and talk about some of the common issues that are coming up as we try to proceed in those roles, or the, again, most common things that present themselves. And go forth from there and talk about some of these pillars in order for us to have good marriages. I know, unfortunately, some of the fellowships that I have attended, when it comes to these issues, we are afraid of saying what God says. because we feel like people today would not receive what God has to say. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, does God want to harm us? Is it his intention to give us instructions that are not good for us and it be because of our downfall? Or is it our old sin nature that rebels against instruction, rebels against what God says? And we need to figure out how to deal with that. But also to realize that God has our best interest at heart. He wants us to have good marriage, but he knows that there are issues within our heart. And as we come together, what are the instructions that we need in order to become healthy and have good marriages? And we don't need to be afraid or ashamed of what God says. Especially if we profess to be Christian, we want to be Christ-like. We want to see what God has to say. But our biggest problem is misapplying what God says. And we go to the extreme. And we want to talk about how to avoid that and how to remain true to God and avoid the extremes. So these would be some of the things that we're going to talk about in upcoming weeks. And again, I hope that you join us in this channel. We try to focus on what God has to say about things and be able to have a balanced view of things of God and the direction that God has to say for us and say to us. We do not want to avoid it, but we have over 30 some years of experience that I want to be able to communicate and be able to say things to avoid the pitfalls that we have fallen into, that the next generation or whoever listens to these videos be able to avoid those pitfalls and be a healthy Christian and have a healthy Christian marriage. So if these are things that you like to listen to, again, you may want to consider subscribing, because that's what our channel is dedicated to proclaiming godly values, godly things, unashamedly, not in an offensive way, but to give the wisdom behind what God says. So if these are the things you are interested in, again, consider subscribing and see if our service to you can be of some benefit. Now, until next time, may the Lord be with you. May he watch over you. May he make his face to shine upon you as you go forth with him. This is David Sami with the Christian Journey.